Well, I was born in 35 Wellington Street. It no longer exists now, it's been demolished, but it ran parallel with Freeberry Wall. It was a great street. We lived in a two down house. One of the streets and one in that old part that is now demolished of the Bogside, where there was poor housing conditions, unsanitary houses, but a great community spirit. We nearly exchanged one slum for another, one ghetto for another. Slum's the wrong word, one ghetto for another. And we realised that there was really nothing in Cregan. There was one school for something like 11,000 children. There was no church when I moved in. There was very few shops. Certainly, there was no, the transport was whatever few buses. Remember the old double deckers? And you walked everywhere, But our community association got together. I remember our first meeting, because there was no place to meet. We met in the old boys' club, which was away in Beechwood Avenue at the other side of Cregan. And we got ourselves together and elected a chairperson. I hadn't a clue what we were doing. At least I hadn't a clue what I was doing, but I knew that we needed to do something. Just to look at getting facilities that probably most other communities took for granted. But it was the beginning of something. I like to think, maybe a wee bit romantically, that it was the beginning of people getting off their knees and saying, we don't need to live like this, and the tenants associations caught on. It really was a movement in itself, but at that time, we hadn't a notion what we were doing. All we were looking to do was simply improve the lot of the places we were living in. And I think the result of that, because we began to get results for our campaigning, people began to notice that, this crowd up here is not going to go away. All that led to the civil rights movement came into being. That was very inspiring, certainly for us in the Tenants Association. It showed you that the old regime, the status quo, the thing that kept us as unequal citizens or second-class citizens or whatever label you want to put on us, where we were that was being challenged through the civil rights movement. And the Tenants Association, the men in the Tenants Association would have been in touch with everything that was going on in the Bogside, but they were stuck up in Cregan with my newborn, and I never took her upstairs. I kept her with the bag packed, sitting in the cot, because I was afraid that we would have to get up. That's how scary it was. That's how frightening, and that's how people didn't know what was happening. Communications wasn't as it is now. So I used to keep this Kathy sitting in the sitting room. None of us went to bed. I knew my husband was somewhere in the Bogside. My mother sent my sisters up to tell me that they'd seen him somewhere, like it was a sighting, And he was very active with the Battle of the Bogside, and he's dead now, God have mercy on him. And our Tenants Association, Pat McChrystal and myself, went round the doors to collect, and they needed, wait for it, they needed ammunition in the Bogside. Ammunition was for petrol bombs. It was flour and sugar. I'm trying to remember what the other ingredients were made up in Molotov cocktail, but with flour and sugar, we went round the doors collecting them and sent them down to the Bogside where the battle was raging. And I do recall hearing on the radio that Jack Lynch wasn't going to stand idly by, and knocking at Teresa McManus lived next door to me, great neighbours, and she was the neighbours across the street had gone. I knocked at Teresa's door. Teresa said to me, the army's coming. And I said to her, what army? Because I thought she meant the army of the administration in Dublin. And she said, the British Army. I didn't believe it. I thought she was, I said, it couldn't be the British Army. She said, it is. So the British Army came. And I remember it was the 14th of August, and it was the day before the Feast of the Assumption, down to chapel to confession. And when I got to the roundabout at St Mary's Church in Craigan, Phil McLaughlin was then, and there was a lorry coming round the roundabout. There was all these young fellas with their fists, really dirty black fists, and you stood in the yard with them, and everybody was cheering them. And I didn't understand what on earth this was about. But I remember Phil McLaughlin saying to me, Mary, they think this is all over, but it's only beginning. And was he not right? I mean, it was only beginning.
Yeah, my name is Finbar O'Doherty. I was born in Derry at 134 Bogside. My job in the movement was education and communication officer. The march went ahead. The Minister of Home Affairs, Willie Craig, was on the far right of the unionist spectrum, and he was out to get rid of O'Neill, and so was Paisley. And O'Neill, I'm not saying O'Neill was a great liberal, but I would say that if O'Neill, some of his reforms, had been resistant to his reforms, we might well be in a totally different situation. We didn't want that parade walking through, passing right through the bottom of William Street and on down the Strand Road. So it was decided we would resist the Orange Order marching through, not because they were unionists or anything else, because they wore sashes, but this was a cultural and sectarian exercise to assert more or less their right to walk anywhere in this city, especially after it happened. And the Sammy Devaney issue was a major issue, and that when the police were out everywhere, so the march was attacked. But that was the start of the Battle of Bogside. But my job after the Battle of Bogside started, communications were very important, that we could be able to communicate with the people. So we had Radio Free Derry set up. First of all, it was held in Welton Street, and then it was moved on to multi-storey flats. Well, my job in the movement was education and communication officer. So my job was turning out, getting posters, helping me get posters printed, leaflets, barricade bulletin, all the rest. And then at that stage, it set up the Derry Citizens Defence Committee that operated from number 10 Weston Street, Paddy Bogside's house. But we remained outside of the committee. Not all of us. There was some Republicans in that committee. Sean Keenan actually was the chairman. He spent 16 years in jail, not all in one go. He was interned so often. 16 years without charge or trial under Special Powers Act. And the point is that was one of the aims of the civil rights movement, to get rid of the special powers, bring in equal vote, a point system of housing, the abolition of the old Derry Corporation, the decommission of the B specials. I mean, the list, freedom of speech, right? Freedom of assembly. The list is very clear. A lot of people forget what civil rights were about. It wasn't just about marching, it was about those basic demands. But I was out there for right through the 72 hours, and usually sleep at the top of the flats. And sometimes, you look back and say, hey, where did I go for something to eat? Or where did I go to the toilet? And then I remembered, that wee woman, Mrs. Shields, my Shields, you know him. She would feed me like, well, these people had very little. They were on the dole, and although the shirt factories were going in those days, and she used to take on shirts and work on her own time. But the point is that, and who fed me, and then where to go to the toilet? I mean, these wee practical things years later you start thinking about. Well, coming along Foster's Terrace one day, which was, in those days, just opposite a big gas yard wall. And there was an old woman standing like with an apron on her. Now remember, in the back room as a CS gas, and the rubber bullets were flying, and people were being battened and God knows what. And the din was terrible. And Foster's Terrace wasn't far from Agro Corner, Roswell Street. And I thought, you can see me, how's the revolution coming on? She said to me, 1-1 to 230 Newmarket. She thought I was a bookies runner. So my job was going around the barricades on a bicycle. Then you reported back how more people needed in the barricade in Cragen or somewhere. Or they're running out of food or something, you know. And then you get on the radio, them would announce we need more people in Cragen. And so the communication side worked out very well. And then they started their own postal service inside Derry and things like that. So it's amazing what the ordinary people can do. They can create their own apparatus of administration, you know, in spite of what the state does.
My father's name was Mark, and my mother's name was Bella McLaughlin. We lived on 73 Fox's Corner. And on 64, we moved over to Meanan Park, Drumcliff Avenue, and they had 13 of a family. And the father was a merchant seaman. The mother obviously was a housewife. Well, they would have supplied food, and the father would have been out doing the barricades in the free dairy area and helping in every way possible. And I think, I'm not sure, it possibly might have been in Sinn Féin at that stage, the 72 era. But the mother, she would have done PDF and, you know, all out on all protests and against the different things that was going on, you know. Well, first of all, it was 68, and we went to march in Duke Street. And 69 was the Battle of Bogside. And I mind my father, he actually, I remember him actually saying that he says, I'm not fit for throwing stones. He says, but by God, I'll make sure that they have plenty of stones. And he used to run up and down Roswell Street with a wheelbarrow, keeping the supplies going. Well, the father, he would have been very political. He was involved with the Republican movements from far back as I could remember, because I actually remember taking Republican United Irishmen over to different places for him. At that stage, that's even before 68. So he was definitely very Republican minded, you know, very strong, and the mother would have been the same. She would have been all for civil rights and for justice. Well, I think they should be remembered for the parts that they played as everybody else's. The mother and the father played a big part in, first of all, the civil rights movement, and then when internment was introduced, the fight against the injustices, what was going on in Northern Ireland, and try to get things more or less as best could be, sort of.
Well, Billy McVeigh. Some people know me as Wee Bill. Anyway, born in the Wells, St Colum's Wells. Part of the Bogside, if you like. Grew up mostly in Cragen. From a large family, 9 sisters, 5 brothers. When we got housed from the Wells, there was 3 families in one house, which was 3 bedrooms. There was 3 different families sharing a kitchen and an outside toilet. Although that didn't affect me because I was only a baby. Then when we got housed in the Cragen area, it was like paradise, football field, all this free movement and house to yourself, well, house to your own family. Your mammy would often mention B-men in those days, and you never knew what a B-man was. Going to bed at night as a child, you'd say to yourself, there's a B-man living in a corner. I wonder, is he some sort of a evil person or whatever? She wasn't far out of that. That thinking was near enough. Of course, it started, the 5th of October was my first memory of the first March. I know it was March before that, but the 5th of October was the big one. And when the B-men, as we know them now, and the RUC, batting people off the streets. I always remember my grandmother's area, and they talked about the B-men again, and used to be attacking houses in the Bogside. They were seen to be apparently around the areas drinking wine in those days, and it was true because there's photographs of them actually sitting along the wall with bottles. And they came along several nights in the middle of the night. I remember my granny being terrified and my aunts, and he smashed the windows and kicked on doors, full drunk. The word went round, this is supposed to be a police force. B-men breaking in the house, smashing windows and whatever. Can't happen. So then the riots began. So everybody in the Bogside then was involved, from aunts, from grannies, right down. And I always remember like like a conveyor belt system. My aunts, for example, were making petrol bombs. Somebody was supplying the bottles, somebody was pouring on the petrol, somebody was putting on the sugar or flour to make to stick to the target, like a police jeep or whatever, or a wall, and somebody else put the cloth on, which is the fuse, if you like. All we wanted was equal rights, civil rights, equality. That's all we wanted. Jobs, housing, civil rights. I'll never forget it the day today. One of my biggest memories is I went to throw a petrol bomb and the fuse came out of it, like it's just a piece of cloth to hold it on tight. And when that came out, the petrol poured down my back and it was already lit and I was on fire and the police was through this alleyway. And I'll never forget it the day I die. When I hit the ground, all the guys around me, all friends and older men that didn't even know me, danced on me. And I was saying, I hope I get arrested or if I don't, I'm going to get trampled to death to put the fire out. There was my jacket on fire. So I had to hide that jacket and pretend I lost it, throw it away. My mother would have went stone mad. I would say we took on the might of the British Empire with sticks and stones. They started to shoot at us. So some people decided then we're going to have to shoot back because you can only get kicked so many times in the stomach. You've got to get up and start kicking back. The mural is 100% me, but it's not about me. It's about defiance, civil rights equality, jobs, housing, and one man, one vote. Always remember one man, one vote.
My name's Daniel McBurdy, or Danny McBurdy, and I used to live in 173 Lone Moor Road. My father, even though he was ill, had a passion for greyhounds. And he met, there was these two fellas from up around, one from Ballarone and Ballinderry and up around them directions. And there were two orange men. One of them was by the name of Willie Berryman, and the other was Willie McGuckin. But leading up to that particular march, my mother was sewing, because she always had a sewing machine and was sewing. And Willie McGuckin, he brought down this sash of his that had all the braids had all come off it, and there was Muller sewing the sash and all the rest of it. So we thought nothing of it, you know. As he didn't think anything of it, to be very honest. But on the actual day of the march, my mother knew there was going to be trouble in the town. So she said to me, "Father, you're not going out the door." So my father was thirsting about and looking around, and it was like manna from heaven to him when he seen the car pulling up outside and these three orange men getting out of it and coming up into the house. And everybody in the house, well, looked, not that, geez, what are you doing up on here? Because we all knew that the town was in turmoil. There was droves of people walking across the street, droves of them. But the three boys had left their hats in the back of the car. And everybody was looking into the car and they seen the bowler hats. So another neighbour come along and she had noticed what they were doing, and she went up and she got a big newspaper and come into the house and she cut the newspaper and she put it over the hats so that nobody would see into it, you know. So the dilemma was then that the entire Bogside was all being barricaded off at every access point to it was being barricaded off. And there was only one way that they could have got out, and that was going up by Hermanbagger. So we were sitting and they were talking, how are we going to get these men out of here without any problems, you know? And the two men come in and they sat down and they said, what's all the trouble about, or what's going on? And they genuinely didn't have a notion. They were two just out boys from up a country coming down, and they come down to Derry for the march, and they took me to, as they did every time, down to Mealy's Bar. There was nothing unusual about it. But my ma said, "Oh, geez, you're in a bad place this day because of all the on things that was ongoing." But my mother had my father's shoes and socks had prior to them coming in, and she could do nothing else but get him the shoes and socks to get them out. And he eventually took them out, and he took them up the Coach Road and then through that wee school at Hermanbagger, and got them out that way and onto Lecky Road and away round and out. Now the bog itself, at that time I remember that place, and it was chaos, it was turmoil. And I remember the rubber bullets being fired by these cops who were firing these rubber bullets, and then they were starting to shoot this CS gas. And I remember Bernadette Devlin had been running around, And I was up at the front like all the other young people of the day, and we were throwing stones and we were throwing everything that we could get our hands at them, you know. But I wasn't really thinking what was this all about. I was enjoying the fun, to be very honest, you know. And that was until one of these CS gas canister hit me in the foot, and the gas went up round me, and I brought it a cough, and the water was under my eyes and burned the devil, and she got out to me, she said, "Get you way up here." And they got people, they pulled me away out, you know. But that ensued for 2 days until, it was about 2 days, until like it was a Monday evening about 6 o'clock when the army came in. You know, there's no point in talking about exactly. The riot was the same as any other riot. The boys were on the top of the flats, and they actually kept them at bay because the cops couldn't get past them. And until such times as the army come in, and then there was sort of a calmness, an uneasy calmness was set about the place, and the rioting stopped, and well, the pictures will tell you about the likes of Paddy Bogside got up and asked and all the questions to the army about who they were and what they were and all the rest of it. But that was all right. Once that sequence of events ended, we then set up a defence force around the area. I was 14 or something like that, and we all got these wee armbands, and we were down guarding the barricades, and anybody coming in or out, we were stopping and looking. Not that it would have made any difference. I don't know really what we were doing, but we were just doing what we were told, you know.
My name is Carmel McCafferty. I lived in 8 Beechwood Street, which is at the bottom of Blaze Lane. Mary B's pub was at the top of the street, which was seemingly a very important landmark when I was growing up. I was schooled in St. Eugene's, Long Tower, wee nuns first, St. Eugene's, and then I went to St. Mary's Secondary, because through no fault of my own, I thought I was stupid, only to be told when I reached the tender age of 20 that I was dyslexic. I became a hairdresser, then I became an actress, then I became a carer for my mother, and then I became, one of the most important roles in my life, I became a mother. But in between all that, I was a rioter in the Bogside from August 69 until the last stone was thrown. And I got involved, so to speak, because one night, my husband and I, we were boyfriend and girlfriend then, went to pictures. We were walking down Fawn Street. And this group of people stepped forward and started to ask us questions about, who are you, where are you going, why are you out at this time of the night? And I think I might have been a wee bit cheekier than Kevin, and I told him it was none of his business, that my mother and father knew where I was, and that was all that was important. And who are you, where you come from? And I still told him to mind his own business. And Kevin kept saying, just answer the man, just answer the man. And I said, no. And I said, what kind of a uniform have you on you? What are you doing here? And that was my first experience of a B-man. We got round the corner of Free Dairy Corner, and there was this crowd of fellas standing, and there was a few women, and they said that these B-men were going to raid the wells. And I said to Kevin, I'm not going home. No, well, I'm staying. I want to see this. I've never seen anything like this before in my life. And Kevin said, Carmel, be careful. For God's sake, we're going to get in trouble. And I could batter you on. I'm staying. So we stayed and we saw that raid. And it was horrendous. They battered their way up the wells. So we started throwing stones at them and whatever else we could. And then the crowd got bigger and bigger and bigger, and we fought. The houses in the wells were wrecked. They were wrecked. So we brought pieces of furniture and bedclothes and other things, and we helped the people out in the wells. And I was always very proud of the fact that there was a hairdresser there. Yeah, it wasn't all people from Queen's University and
other places of education. I was there, hairdresser, from Bishop Street, Mayfair. When we were rioting in Derry at that time, it was a majority male. Yeah, it was. When women did riot, you know that story, that saying, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned? Well, you know, you can scorn us with words too, and men sometimes did at that time scorn us with words, but we retaliated verbally, physically. But yeah, men were more to the front than women. But yeah, sorry to say, yeah. But they did not perceive us as the weaker sex. And I remember one night coming home from the Mayfair, and at the bottom of McEwen's Lane, there was a girl tied to a lamppost, and she was being tarred and feathered. And I thought, oh Jesus, no, not my country, please, no, that's going back, that's not going forward. And this girl, from what I remember, was a beauty queen. I can't remember her name now for the life of me. But I had my hairdressing scissors in my bag. And I went up and I cut her down. And they were booing at me and shouting at me. And I just remember straightening my hump, as my mother said, and said, she's a woman. She does not have to be degraded like this. Do we know any men that's going with wrens, whatever you call the woman in the British Army? When you start tarring fellow men, I'll join you.
My daddy was born in the Lecky Road, 1929, and Betty was born in Hamilton Street, 1932. My mummy came from a family of 13. 14 actually, one died, but 13 living, and my daddy came from a family of 5. So times were hard enough then. But they struggled through, and they met in 1953 and married in 1955.
But they did have to live in a room in a shared house. There wasn't any housing in them days for them, so I think that's where they kind of seen that was hard times for them, and that I think that's why they kind of became so political as well, and were part of the civil rights movement and stuff.
So my daddy was well aware of republicanism and Republican activity even before he met my mummy. But when they suffered the hardship and the discrimination and the gerrymandering that they seen around them, and that reinforced their belief in civil rights and in equality for all.
Well, I remember 1969, the Battle of the Bogside. My daddy was down. He was down there 3 days, 3 nights, and one of the nights, Dr. McDermott, God have mercy on him, brought him home and said to my mummy, keep that man in this house. Don't be letting him back down, because he was exhausted. He was down 3 days, 3 nights, and he had the effects of the CS gas, and he was put to bed and told not to move out of the house. And my mummy sent one of us up to tell him that he's giving me stunner, or telling me stunner was ready. And my daddy was gone. I don't know if he came out the window or how he got out, but he sneaked out of the house and went back down to the Battle of the Bogside. Anything that was going on, my daddy was out with the camera, and he's been known as being out with the camera, no matter where he was or what was going on. My daddy has a photograph of it.
I think he always thought it was well important as well. He was
the
well
memories.
interested in history,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
always wanted to capture things that were happening. And there was one particular story I remember. One time I remember he was arrested. He had his camera around his neck, but he hadn't been taking photographs at the time. He was actually delivering photographs they had taken of First Communion, or whatever it was. And he came across one of the riots in the town, in the city centre, and the soldiers obviously thought he was taking photographs because he had the camera around his neck. And he actually said then later on, he did have a few sneaky photographs, But the soldiers wanted the film off him, and he was fighting with them and not giving. He wanted the camera, give me your camera. He'd got the film out of the camera and had it in his pocket and got slipping it to somebody else anyway. But they did arrest him. They wanted the film. And he was arrested. I think he spent a weekend then in Crumlin Road Jail.
My mum and that got ready and went down to the court, and he was he was found guilty of riotous behaviour and he was bound over to keep the peace. But of course it didn't stop my daddy going back down to any of the riots that were happening.
And the camera was still around his neck. And one of my memories, and I was only very young when Bloody Sunday happened, but it's a memory I'll never forget. That picture that I still have in my head where my mummy couldn't eat her dinner because and I still remember saying to Breach, push the plate away from the table, and she said, I can't eat that after what I've seen in our city that day. And she just was in tears.
Tears, that's right.
You know.
But a part of that, the period that we're talking about, you know, from 68 through to 72, the Bloody Sunday time, you had the free dairy period. The people were trying to stop the British Army from moving into the areas, or trying to stop the RUC from moving into the areas. And at night, you had the vigilantes, you had the men out in the streets, and the women then would have made the tea and the sandwiches and baked the scones and took them out to the vigilantes at night. And my mommy done that every night. Went out with the cups of tea and the sandwiches and the buns and that. And any march, protest, rally, whatever, during that period, my mum and my daddy were at them all. And they, when they eventually started telling us the story, they had told us that they had actually witnessed the first shootings on Bloody Sunday. John Johnson was shot, and my mammy went to run out to help him, to go to his assistance. And my daddy pulled her back because my daddy knew what was likely to happen. But Bubbles Donaghy ran out to help John Johnson, and Bubbles got shot. But that could have been my mammy. If my daddy hadn't pulled her back, realising, you know, don't be going out there, Betty, you know.
Well, my name's Anne Grant. My maiden name is Walsh, and my daddy is Paddy Walsh. Well, there's 5 of us, 1 boy, Brian, and I have 3 sisters, Patricia, Fabian and Yvonne, and we all grew up in Rathlin Drive. Well, the older ones grew up in Cromer Gardens first, and then when his mum and daddy always says a big 3-bedroom house came along, they couldn't pass off the offer and moved down on the Rathlin Drive, and it was just like, oh God, this is too big now. We need more children. So me and Yvonne came along then within 2 years. We're Irish twins, as they say. We lost house, so our street was amazing. I loved our street. Like, we're still in contact with everybody, even though we've moved out a good wee while now. But I remember I got split twice, here and here. And one time they thought I was shot because the army were sitting down at the end of the square. Somebody was aiming at them and they were telling me to get out of the way, but I ran towards the brick, and that's how it happened. And then he attended me, the soldier, until my big sister came down to get me, because somebody ran up the house to tell her, and then I was taken to the hospital. Then going to get my stitches out a couple of days later, and that's when another soldier was lying in the bed beside me, and he was, what happened to you, and stuff like that, you know, trying to just be nice. And Daddy was like, they were talking to him, you know, sort of thing. So you just done what your father told you to do, so he did nothing then. But that was all around the time of Stephen McConaughey, who was in my class at school, and Stephen had been killed with a plastic bullet. And it's a week in my life that I'll never ever forget, from the moment I heard he was shot till the day he was buried, and I had to read in the chapel. If there's any bother, everybody went to my daddy first. And I always remember telling stories about when Craiglan was no-go area. He was the one that went down the Balma Southway to get the bread and the milk of the bread and the milkman down the Balma Road to bring it up for everybody in the street. That was his job, because he didn't have any fear, you know what I mean? He just went on and do it. He just wanted to look after everybody in the street. On the day he attended the march like everybody else in Derry wanted to do. My older brother, Brian, would have been 8 maybe at the time, but he was sent home because my daddy just had a fear that something could happen. So he was sent home to get back up to the house. He went in the march, and he, you know, just hearing stories from him and from other people, he did his human nature. What to do is to go and help somebody, another human being in need. It's seeing the photographs and realising how much, you know, he put his life at risk that day. And there's all the different stages. You see Daddy crawling out behind Paddy Doherty, and then leaning over Paddy Doherty, and then carrying Paddy Doherty. And you just realise how, my God, he just put his self out there to help somebody that time, and then people realising, who he was. When he had to go to the tribunal and talk about it, he just came out of a major operation, but nothing was stopping him to go to that tribunal. He had to do it. He was so sick, and there's a photograph of him and Tony Doherty standing outside the Guildhall after he gave his evidence, and you could just look at me. You just knew my father was just off the bed, that he had a big operation, but he wanted to see his city be where it should be and not be accused of what they were accused of doing. What it leaves for us is just something to be really, really proud of what he done as a community, what he done for his community, what he done on Bloody Sunday, and what he done for, us as a family, rearing us to be the people who we are.
My father was Michael Montgomery. Mickey Montgomery was known as. I knew my father was always involved with something. There was always meetings going on in the house. My father was interned, and I remember the night that he was interned, and he was one of the 10 hooded men, and him getting dragged out of the house. That was just chaos, and the whole house was just upside down. My granny and granda was there. I remember the sergeants going down the street and him in the back, and we all ran out onto the street, and my granda was running down the street after them, calling for him to come back. But he was interned, and we didn't hear from him for maybe a couple of weeks. We found out that he was dead. They told us that he had died, and it was all stories like this coming back. So in the house, it was just madness. My mother just took a breakdown, but then he got released, and I remember him came was babysitting us. I don't know, my father was in the run at the time, and I remember running up the stairs into the house, and he was under the bed. He thought somebody else was coming in, and he jumped out of the bed, but I knew when I went into the room that he was there. So at that time then, when he was released, I think he went for election. People started voting for him. Because the house, the door never stopped, night and day, and he was always going down to the housing executive, sorting out houses for them. He was always involved in the community. And then he just was elected. He was the first Republican councillor in Derry, I think, around that time. Well, it's non-stop, like the people that have come to me, and, I know people myself that have said, Fiona, he was amazing. He just was there, for the people of Derry during the civil rights and stuff like that. He just wanted people to be recognised and people to get justice, even the likes of the housing and the gerrymandering and all, he just was there in the middle of it all, doing stuff for them. We were sent away a lot, to Galway. There was people in Galway that was taking families down at the time, so we would have been sent away to Galway and, Easter, Christmas and summer holidays. So then my father wasn't around, he wasn't there really during the day, he was always there just at night. And then after the interment, then his health just went down. He just really took, and he died at 48 with a heart attack. So I think that time that he was interned definitely impacted on his health. I really do. I just think that he just wasn't the same mentally and physically. He definitely wasn't the same. We couldn't turn the Hoover on in the house, so even if the twin tub washing machine, if that was going, if the spinner was going, he used to jump. Even the noise of the newspaper, it was just, he just couldn't. He would have sat down the stairs crying a lot at night. He was drinking, he would have just sat crying the whole, to get up during the night and him sitting in the kitchen crying. He was just so insecure then in himself, he just wasn't the same man. He definitely wasn't. And him and my mother had split up then, and he was just in pieces. So I was the one then coming behind him, pulling him on.
My name's John McCourt. I'm going to be talking about my mother, Annie McCourt, formerly Annie McGrory. I have two brothers and had a sister. And we lived in Cregan, lived in Carrygray Gardens in Cregan. Went up there in 1966 after coming out of the children's home that we'd spent 10 years in. And we arrived in Cregan in a house that literally had bleached floorboards and borrowed furniture and a mattress that my mother made with a big piece of cloth she got out of a factory stuffed with all of the offcuts of the old of shirts from the shirt factory, and the girls brought them to her, a pillowcase at a time. You know, eventually, by the time we get through 1969, the situation has completely changed. The army are on the streets, and I think that's the first time I'd actually, heard my mother swear. So I think from that point, my mother started going on marches, particularly after internment. She marched against internment, and I think that sort of, for me, was the start of what was a sort of a politicization, really, as far as I was concerned, of my mother not realizing that she had a generation of history on this, on this stuff, on protest and on the conflict in this country. I think back and I laugh about this now, because when the army would be coming to the door, she'd hear the armoured cars coming up the street. She'd always be in if I was at home. She'd be in if I was sleeping on the sofa, or if I was in bed. John, the army are here. The army are coming. So I'd be up and out the back window and down the drain, piping over the wall, and just wondering what would happen. Sometimes I'd just be in the flat next door while the army are. I could hear the noise and turning stuff over in the house, and my mother's shouting and roaring. But before they even got to the door, my mother had a special treat for them. We lived in an upstairs flat, and there's a window directly above the front door of the flat. And people normally went downstairs at night and washed out their milk bottles, left them sitting on the doorstep for the milkman to collect in the morning. My mother washed the milk bottles out, left them sitting on the window above the door, so that when the army or the police came, she opened the window and she just started firing bottles down at them. And that was my mother. And, right through, I remember Operation Motorman again. I had been at home earlier in the evening. I knew I wasn't going to be there that night. Or I knew I wasn't going to be in Cregan that night. And my mother's getting ready for this. Of course, the milk bottles are all out on the windowsill again. And when they came in, my mother started firing bottles down at the army. And a soldier fired a rubber bullet at her. And it went in through the window that she had opened. It didn't hit her. It went in through the window that she had opened. And she managed to get it, and she kept it. And on her 90th birthday, my mother presented that rubber bullet to the Museum of Free Derry. And it's down there in a glass case with her name beside it. It's a really interesting story around this rubber bullet. So there was a friend of mine, he was an engineer, made a copper casing for it. And my mother every day, every couple of days, would shine this up with brass. So it would be gleaming, sitting on the windowsill. The army are coming in and out of the house. And one of the things they did when they came into the house was pull the curtains. But as they pulled the curtains, my mother saw the soldier lift this rubber bullet and put it inside his jacket. And when they were finished searching, my mother called him, and the soldier went down the stairs into the back of the armoured car. My mother went down the stairs into the back of the armoured car, took off her slipper, started hitting him about the head with the slipper until he handed it back to her. Gave it back to her. Soldiers never tried to steal that rubber bullet again. But that was my mother, just absolute and total resistance. And passive resistance was something that wasn't going to work with my mother. You had to be out there and you had to be doing stuff. Sitting back and shouting about it, writing letters about it. No, get out there, challenge them all the time. And that's what she did,
My father was Sean Keenan. He was born in St Columb's Street, just round the corner from St Columb's Wells. He was born into a family of 5, 4 boys and 1 girl. His family were a Republican family. His father had spent time in prison. He had a strong sense of what I like to call what was right and what was wrong. And my mother was exactly the same, very strong woman. Her and 2 of her sisters had been interned in Armagh prison. There was a meeting called in, I think it was the Harps Hall in the Brandywell, by concerned residents, and the Derry Citizens Defence Committee was set up at that time. My father was elected by the people who were there as chairperson, and a man called Johnny White was the secretary. at that meeting, it was decided that the two priorities would be to keep the peace and the defence of the area. Once the Battle of the Bogside, I mean, just before the Battle of the Bogside, my father, and it may have been Paddy Doherty, or as they call him Paddy Bogside, had went to meet the apprentice boys to ask them not to march, or at the very least to reroute, and not to march past the flashpoints would have been the Waterloo Place and Little James's Street, but they refused and held their march. And, you know, the rest is history. Everybody knows what happened that day and that night. I mean, at the time, the Battle of the Bogside, there was over 1,000, over that couple of days, there was over 1,000 canisters of gas fired at the people from the Bogside. Nobody knows exactly how many petrol bombs were thrown, but I know the old city dairy lost around 20,000 bottles at the time, so you can sort of do your sums. By 1971, he was interned. And then his son Colin, my brother, was shot dead in March while my father was interned, and he was released for 4 or 5 days at the time. So I think his life, he never looked for anything for himself. His life was about doing right for his community. Because if you're a Republican, you're also a community activist. I think the two actually go hand in hand. I think they work together.
My mother's name was Eileen Harkin. She actually, her own maiden name was Morning. She came from the Bullies on the Waterside. We moved to Craigan whenever they built the houses as part of the gerrymandering in the city. So when we moved to Craigan, there was 3 of a family at that stage. My elder brother and 2 girls. And I remember moving onto the estate, and it was a mucky garden, but a brand new house. So that community that moved on built the community in Craigan. They were it was like open door housing, you know. If somebody needed something, they got it. I remember people knocking for a cup of sugar, or my father worked away, and when the telegraph man come with his wages, you know, somebody got 10 bob and somebody got, you know, all that kind of stuff. And one of her favourite tricks was that when the telegraph man came with my daddy's money, he was either in America or England working, she would have sat there and the neighbours would have come on, Eileen, you get your money of the day. And she'd have said, I would have to clean the house. So go you on down and cash your money and we'll clean the house. And she was always up to a trick. But she was very strong, a very, very strong woman. So those strong women became the community in Craigan. And then as things moved on and as the civil rights movement started up and the whole issue in and around marching and being treated as proper human beings really, really got there. So she was very active in all of that sort of protest, supporting the protest rallies, marches. She was out there along with a whole lot of other women because the women were the backbone of that community. I think she was at every riot that was going down in William Street. I think she was at every raid that happened. They used to, at that time, listen to the radio to see what was happening. You know, in the early days, they were able to pick up communications and that type of stuff. So they were like an early warning system nearly, but there were riots every day, either on the new road or on the bog, and they were always about there. They were either making sure that people had stones to throw, or they were making sure if people were hurt or the police were trying to arrest them, whatever, that they moved on nearly as a group to defend people in the middle of all that kind of stuff. So they wanted to be part of it. My mother's own head would have been nationalist, Eddie McAteer, sort of
I think she voted, that's who she voted for. I think she voted for John Hume in the first March because there's photographs of her, and that, or his first election, you know. But then that wasn't strong enough for her, basically. So you weren't indoctrinated. You made your own choice, and I made a choice to join Sinn Féin, and there were a whole lot of issues that drove me that way. I worked in the hospital in the early days, and I remember, you know, the Burnt Toilet March, and I remember people getting brought into the hospital and then badly cut, injured, all that kind of stuff, stuck in my head. I remember coming from work one day and watched a man getting beaten under the door of what is now Tracy's Bar by the RUC then, and it's just sort of things that sort of come into your head. People weren't going to stand back and watch people, you know, being hurt, shot, abused, arrested for nothing, you know, all that type of stuff. Like because I had about a first aid, the first aid centre that was down on the Bogside, I ran down there. But there was a crew of people who turned up there every time it was necessary, just to make sure that if people were hurt, there was first aid there. If people needed to go to a hospital, then they were taken. And that's another one of the sort of roles that my mother would have been involved in. If somebody had to be taken to Letterkenny Hospital rather than Alton, in case they would get arrested, then they did that kind of travelling with them too. They were the basis and the backbone of demanding, you know, proper housing, demanding the right to vote, demanding the necessity for communities to be serviced, all that type of stuff. If they hadn't took up that cudgel, along with the groups that sort of organised it, then it wouldn't have survived.
My name is Eamon Mallock, and I was born in Bridge Street, a slum tenement house with 10 families, one outside water top, one outside toilet, in the year 1933, which makes me a geriatric of 87. I spent a very happy childhood. A Derry of my youth was an entirely different world from what it is now. We would have played with spinning tops and marbles and skipping ropes. And those innocent days are all gone. I got involved in the Springtown campaign. I was involved in that. And there was 3 people from Derry who walked in that: myself, a fellow called Early, and a school man's called Thornton. I was involved in everything that was going. I was provoking it. I went to the people in Springtown and told them to get organised. And there'd be one long hut. If the other half of the hut was vacated, I told them to set their half on fire, get what little belongings they had out. And that was done. That's the things people had to do. They had to become criminals to get the democratic rights. What happened at the Battle of Bogside, the thing exploded out of control. Nobody had any control. The mass mind had taken over, and the mass mind is a very dangerous phenomenon. Now, I was there when the 12th of August march went down the Strand Road, something which had never been allowed to have happened. But anyhow, it went ahead. And when the genie came out of the bottle and wasn't going to be put in it, back in it again, and that was the road to perdition. That was the road to mass murders. Well, I photographed them within minutes of them coming in the street, and there was a lot of euphoria about them coming in the street. And I said to people, look, we're 700 years of these people's on our streets. Butchery and savagery and barbarity from the British Army. They're not guardian angels coming in to protect us. They're coming in to protect the status quo. I mean, they surrounded the Bogside. You couldn't get in or out the Bogside, but you were checked, you were searched. And I said to people, this is a nonsense. There were women taking them out tea and sandwiches. I never believed in this concept of free Derry. I never actually believed in it. we were never free from the deprivation that existed. I mean, I can show you photographs of Derry that I took where the conditions were dreadful, and that's a mild enough word to use. So it wasn't free from deprivation. It wasn't free from the need, the dependency on social services and unemployment benefits. So it was never free. They had found a confidence, they had found a voice that had to be listened to. So it was free to that extent, but that was a limited degree of freedom. There's nobody living in a capitalist system that is free.
My mother was Moya Duffy. Moya McCourt was her maiden name. She came from the Waterside. She worked in the shirt factory. And she met my father back in 1948, 49. The Brandywell was the main no-go area. The Battle of the Bog really started in the Brandywell back in 1969, because in 1968 there was a family in Duke Street who was getting put out of their house for getting evicted. And they pulled a caravan, they moved under a caravan. I think their name was Watson. And they put under a caravan, they put the caravan across the street from our house, which was up a bit from our house, was across the street from Jan's Bishop, which was 2 doors up from us. And my father, he helped, as well as my mother, to campaign for one man, one vote, one man, one house, one man, one job. That was the start of it. My mother started off with a group of women in the Brandywell, because the Brandywell was becoming a no-go area at the very start of the Troubles. And my mother, I'm going to name names now because most of these people are all dead. There was Sheila Coyle, who's was a popular. There was Noreen Loke, who was Martin McGuinness's mother-in-law. There was British Stars. They all done like a vigilante, going round shops and round. I have skipped from the caravan to the Troubles now, where the Troubles is at its heights, and they went round shops and asked for donations. They set up to collect money, to do raffles, to collect money for the men and women. For the boys that was on the run, that was out on the streets doing their vigilante work, stopping cars and doing all this for the Brandywell. In the Brandywell area, they're always talking about the Battle of the Bog. There was a battle in the Brandywell. We had the Battle of the Brandywell. When I was at Wayne, we were all Waynes. We were sent. The battle took place in the heart of the Brandywell, and we were known as living in the front street. We lived in the front street. So there's buses came into Derry. They took all the Waynes, they evacuate all the Waynes out of the Brandywell and the Bog, and they were all sent down to some place in Donegal. We weren't. We were sent down. And Mother says, no, the Waynes, we were sent down to South End Park, the street behind our street, and we weren't allowed outside that door. We went down to stay with a family called Parks in South End Park. And there was Eileen Park, Nora Park. They wouldn't let us outside the door. We were to sit, and back then TV wasn't like TV as today, where you could sit and watch TV. You couldn't. We all were told to sit in the sofa and not allowed to move. Where my mother was up there making, helping to make petrol bombs. Petrol bombs and Molly called cocktails, I don't know if I'm saying that right, back in the day, up in the front street. My brother snuck out and decided he's going up to sea, and he went up and he got involved in the battle at the front street. Whereas the rest of us, we weren't allowed it, and we tried. So this went on for a couple of days in the Brandywell. So the Battle of the Bog really started in the Brandywell.
Our parents were Willie and Kathleen Gallagher. Members of the childhood we had grown up in Rossall Street, they were brilliant. We only had 2 bedrooms, and one of the bedrooms actually was allocated to my mother's father. So there were 7 of us actually in 1 bedroom in Rossall Street. And it was when my mother put in plans to the corporation at the time
to get an extension put onto her house in Rossall Street that they brought up that she couldn't have them. They wouldn't be the plans wouldn't be passed because the houses were going to be knocked down and Rossall flats were going to be built. During the Battle of the Bogside, we lived in Abbott's Walk at the time. My father came in one afternoon and said to my mother, Bernadette Devlin is really exhausted down the barricades. She's going to collapse. Can you put her up in the house? So my mother, of course. Yes, around the Battle of Bogside, it did have an impact because I said that's the first time we actually saw anything that we were, it was brought into our house when my father brought Bernadette Devlin up to stay in the house. And my mother then got heavily involved in a lot of committees. And as a result of that, actually she suffered, the hands of the establishment, both by the army she was beaten and by the guards.
At that time, I was a member of Order of Malta, and there was a march was coming up, and we were all given duties that day, partners who we were going to be with. My partner that day was Rosemary Doyle. The army was just starting to come on, and fired a rubber bullet that missed me because of me being taller than Rosemary, and it just went in like that, through Rosemary's front teeth, and she was injured all up here. The army told us they would come back for me and Rosemary, so we decided we were going up to British Shields flat. We went there, and there was people injured, real shots, real bullets.
There's actually one memory that really stands out in my mind was when we moved to Elmwood Road, and there was a soldier shot practically outside our house on the opposite side of the roadway, and the rest of the soldiers on patrol ran and left them. My mother ran out, got blankets and a pillow, and said the act of contrition in the soldier's ear and stayed with them until, I don't know, whether somebody came in and took him away. And it was a few days later, there was, he said he was a major, came to our house and knocked on a massive big box for my mother present to thank her for what she did. She would not accept the present, but she just said, we are Christians here and I wouldn't do that to anybody. She said, we're well reared, brought up, and she said, I couldn't leave anybody dying without going out to their help. So that's the last memory I have of my mother, how charitable she was, even though she had her own political views. It didn't matter to her that he was a British soldier. She didn't want him to die on his own.
My name's Charlie McMenamin. I'm from the Bogside, born and bred Bogside, and people know me on Twitter as Bogside and Proud. So anything happens in the Bogside, people are sending me messages, what's happening, what's going on. They think I know everything, but there was 6 of us, and we lost one. We grew up in a place called Herd Street, which is just down below the Fountain Estate there. My first experience with the conflict was waking up. We lived in Herd Street. We lived in that street. We lived in number 10 Herd Street. We were out playing, and when we were out playing, we played below the Derry Walls, which is at a place called Nader's Row. And when we looked up on the walls, the police was there. I now know them as the police specials. At some stage, while we were playing, stones came down from the walls, and the only people that we could see on the walls were the police. So we assumed that it was the police, so I ran home and told my mother. One day I decided I was taking my young sister to Abercorn Park, and there we started off. We went up through up Herd Street, up along Nader's Row, and proceeded across Bishop Street and into what I now know as a fountain. I didn't know what its name was, and it was just another street in the area. And as we walked through the street, some of the kids in the street started kicking at us. We just wanted to go to the park and play. While we were going to the park, the adults in the street stood and watched it happening as the other kids kicked at us and punched at us and stuff like that. So we got through, but that was the first experience of anything sectarian, apart from the stones being thrown, the week before. But that was my first. I never went through it again after. So one of the nights during the troubles, the balcony outside was full of people, just full of people, and every time the police made a run to try and catch people, the balcony filled up, and people were going in and out of people's houses. But my grandma was one of them people where she didn't want anything to do with it. She was afraid for her own family. This is talking there years later about it. She was afraid for her own family. I wouldn't let people in the door. So one of the nights where, believe it or not, she had the curtains closed and we couldn't see anything that was happening. And I was just itching to go out the kitchen and watch, but she wouldn't let me. So she got a knock at the door, and someone said, look, the police on the walls are throwing stones down from the walls and smashing people's windows. So be careful, stay away from the windows and stuff. And she came in and she said, they're running around telling people the police are smashing windows, the police wouldn't do things like that. So we were sitting about 10 minutes later, and all the windows came in on top of us. They threw the stones down from the walls and smashed the windows. Lucky enough, the curtains were closed, and that saved anybody from getting injured. But as soon as that happened, my grandfather, he just jumped up. He said, right, that's it. Now I'm going out there and get stuck on these. And all the names he used. He wanted to go out and get involved in it, but she wasn't having it. When they came in, and I think it was 1969, the British Army came in, one of the first things my grandmother done when they set up barricade at Butcher Street there was to make tea and sandwiches and send it up them. Everybody done it, apparently, that lived on the verges at the time. They seen the British Army as the protectors then at that stage. They ran to protect us. Although some more seasoned people would have said, don't trust the British Army. I remember my grandfather saying, Callahan, you shouldn't be sending them people up tea and sandwiches. And I remember my granny saying, well, my sons are living in England. She said, I would like people in England to treat my sons the same way as I'm treating these young men that come here. The day Bloody Sunday happened, as the march went down the street, down Rathlin Drive, I went to the end of the street. But before I went to the end of the street, my mother told me not to go on the march. And she warned me. She said, you will not be out that door, she said, for months. She said, if you go to that march today. But about an hour and a half later, some of our neighbours, I remember one of the Sheehan girls coming up Southway, and she was crying. I remember saying to her, what's wrong? She said, there's people shot. And I said, who? And she said, I don't know who they are, she said, but there's people dead. And as that happened, I went home and told my mother. And my mother said, well, I'm glad you didn't go today, son.
My father was Patrick Lawrence Doherty. He was the second son of my grandfather Hugh, known as the Scalper. He was born in March 1926 in the Bogside in Thomas Street, where he grew up. There's everybody running around talking about this demonstration the 5th of October and who's going to go to it and what, and is it worth going to, etc., etc., etc. And I had planned with my girlfriend at the time that we were going. So I made an excuse to my father so that I could knock off. So I decided, right, I'd head over to Duke Street. I got there with the girlfriend, and her father, believe it or not, he was a very, very quiet man. He decided he would be heading over with us. And I arrived over, and I was totally and absolutely flabbergasted, because there was my dad and my 4 brothers. Directly after, there was a meeting in the City Hotel, to discuss the after effects, whether we would march again or what we would do. And it was decided that there to inaugurate the Citizens Action Group. My father was elected onto it, as were Michael Canavan, Ivan Cooper, John Hume, and it progressed from then. The next big event was the November March, where there was about 25 odd thousand people. My father was appointed Chief Marshal at that, and he instructed the marshals on the procedures, what we were doing, how we were going. And we eventually ended up in the Guildhall Square, having come through the city by different routes. I think we went to practically every demonstration for civil rights as a family. We were totally committed at that stage to peaceful demonstration. Gandhi was the watchword: peaceful protest, civil disobedience. Then, after the November March, August and the Apprentice Boys Parade, there's great fear rising. Everybody was quivering. On the following day, we were organised into stewards, and I got the task at Little James's Street. There was a squad that was there to prevent, originally to prevent, the youth in the Bogside attacking across into Great James's Street where the march was moving. The attack just came first across from Great James's Street across to Little James's Street and then moved on. I was still wearing, believe it or not, a bright orange coat and my armband on, and eventually I just says, right, forget about it. I took my coat off, took my armband off, and as man says, we went on for 3 days. Every now and again, we would head home up to Westland Street. The people in the Bogside, every house you walk past, you all right, son, you all right, you want a sandwich, you want a cup of tea, come on, get a rest. And this went on for 3 days. My father was directing operations, as it were, then for the Defence Association, and the barricades went up all around the place. And eventually, the word came in, the Brits were on their way. The order went out, when the Brits arrive, fall back, do nothing, let them take over. At that stage, it was a total and absolute relief. People were literally falling from exhaustion in the street. I've seen police do it, and I know that because it was a tough time for them too. People and youths were literally just dropping on their feet. The battle was over. People could rest, relax. And then suddenly, people started arriving from everywhere. I mean, and they were coming over to support our people from England, Scotland, Wales, America, France, Germany, and a lot up from Dublin, a lot up from Buncrana, and other parts of Donegal, and it was sort of one big party. They were relieved. They had won a battle. Some people thought at that time of the war. And my father led that to a degree, very much. I mean, he started organising committees, different street committees, different community committees, always with the intention that the movement has to come from the people. And he says, if you don't work with the people, you don't work with the person and satisfy the person, see, you're always going to have a disgruntled person. Disgruntled person leads to a disgruntled community. And someone once said, like, the Bogside, Free Derry was not behind the barricades. Free Derry was in the minds of the people.